The Sistine Chapel was built in 1482 on one side of the Vatican Hill and on foundations that were inadequate for its size. The foundations gradually gave away, and as the building settled, cracks began to appear in the structure of the building. Although the vault ceiling of the chapel was also damaged by cracks, it withstood the strain relatively well because the vault had been built using the ancient Roman technique of casting blocks of local tough volcanic rock, mixed with a mortar of lime and pozzolana volcanic earth onto a temporary wooden frame. On Christmas Day, 1522, 10 years after Michelangelo finished painting the ceiling, the lintel over the entrance door of the chapel collapsed, and a piece of marble killed a Swiss guard who was standing next to Pope Hadrian VI. 1 year later, during a conclave, other large cracks appeared which alarmed the cardinals, who called for Antonio da Sangallo to come verify the stability of the building. In 1569, the architects Piero Ligorio and Vignola were consulted to prevent the further collapse of the building. This they did by reinforcing the foundations and by building massive buttresses. The cracks run across the ceiling are not the only form of damage that the frescoes of Michelangelo have been subjected to over the years. Other problems include water stains and salts efflorescences caused by the infiltration of rainwater from the leaking roof of the chapel, blackening from smoke produced by the large number of candles that were used to illuminate the chapel, and the deteriorations of the animal glues, vegetable resins, and the retouching applied by restorers in the past. The much darkened frescoes induced Pope Paul III to appoint a mundator, or cleaner, in 1543, whose job it was to keep clean the frescoes of dust and other dirt, and also the smoke of lanterns. The mundator was therefore a sort of restorer responsible for cleaning the frescoes and caring for the entire chapel. When the frescoes needed work other than simple dusting, other restorers were called in. As early as May 7th, 1547, Michelangelo's first biographer, Paolo Giovio, wrote the Giorgio Vasari, noting that Michelangelo's work was being destroyed by saltpeter and cracks. Between 1564 and 1566, Domenico Carnevale, a painter from Modena, restored the ceiling where he repainted the various lost details in fresco. Two figures from Sacrifice of Noah, two fingers of the hand of Adam in the scene of creation of man. The left hand of God in the scene of gathering of the waters. Part of the head of the prophet Jeremiah and some other parts. In 1566, Domenico Carnevali cleaned and retouched also the Last Judgment. He put one's initial, CD, and the date, 1566, upon Caron's oar. Between 1710 and 1712, the painter Annibale Mazzuoli cleaned the frescoes of the ceiling and applied T-shaped bronze clamps to anchor weakened plaster. The cleaning was done using sponges and the Greek wine, which was the name of the white wine in the past in Italy. The cleaning of the frescoes by Annibale Mazzuoli certainly did not produce the desired results, especially in the areas damaged by leaking rainwater, and therefore he repainted certain areas, reinforcing the weakened shadows with dark colors and applying animal glue to brighten the frescoes' colors. But 15 years later, in 1768, the frescoes must have been again begun dark with soot and altered glues, because the writer Monsieur de Lalande, who visited the chapel, wrote, "All of the ceiling is without effect. Its colors tend toward brick red and gray." Maestro, io qua però non vedo più niente. I need the light. Grazie. Sì, no, è che per leggere qui avrei bisogno di un po' di... In 1825, the painter Pietro Camuccini attempted to clean the Last Judgment, but the members of Accademia di San Luca did not approve of cleaning tests, and the painter was obliged to make dirty the cleaned area of fresco. Pietro Camuccini made dirty the fresco by brush strokes reproducing bodies modeling. In 1904, the painter Ludovico Seitz carried out a complete restoration of the ceiling, consolidating the plaster by applying brass clamps. At the time, he attempted to clean the frescoes, but the tests were unsatisfactory. Thank you. With the methods available at the time, the restorers were unable to remove the layer of dirt evenly. For this reason, they limited themselves to some retouching, to strengthening shadows by painting over them, and to brighten the colors by the gum arabic resin that we have removed from the frescoes. In 1936, Biagio Biagietti, founder of the Vatican Restoration Laboratory, supervised the work to consolidate the plaster on the ceiling by injection of lime and casein. The roof of the Sistine Chapel was completely rebuilt at the beginning of the century and again restored in 1975. The excellent fresco technique that Michelangelo used permitted the frescoes to survive frequent infiltration of rainwater with little damage. The salts that formed in the surface of the fresco are sulfates, carbonates, and silicates. The latter being the only one of the leave permanent dark stains on the painting. Animal glues were constant danger to the frescoes. As it contracted, it pulled off small but widespread flecks of the paint layer. The restoration of the past had strongly modified the appearance of the frescoes. In fact, the alteration of the glues and many repaintings, particularly those on the shadows of the drapery and on the modeling of the figures, had given the whole ceiling dark, gloomy, and stained tonality in which Michelangelo's chromatic range had remained totally suffocated. In the 19th century, during the Romantic period, the appearance of the frescoes, believed to death or originally intended by the artist, had created the myth that Michelangelo was a tormented and blackly melancholic artist, a myth which many people still believe today. But already Biagio Biagietti, in the course of consolidation work in the ceiling, had realized that Michelangelo's painting was not really what it seemed, and had written, "If and when I will be able to concede it, it will not be difficult for me to show that we see the polychrome juxtaposition of colors as if through smoky glass." The decision to restore a work of art, the procedures to follow and the techniques to be used are variable that depend on four factors. The pictorial technique of the work, its state of conservation, the possibility of guaranteeing good conservation in the future, and the nature of the foreign substances used by restorers in the past. Taking these factors into consideration, the Direzione Generale dei Musei Vaticani has decided to restore Michelangelo's frescoes. The work began in 1980 and finished in 1994. It was made by restorers of Laboratorio di Restauro dei Musei Vaticani and was decided by the art historian, directed by art historian Fabrizio Mancinelli. Based on tests done in Eleazar Lunet, a cleaning method was chosen that would use a widely tested solvent mixer consisting of ammonium bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, desogen, surfactant with an antibacterial and antifungal actions, and carboxymethyl cellulose to gel the mixer, all diluted in water. This is the first cleaning, second cleaning, and the finished cleaning. The areas originally painted in secco by Michelangelo were first previously fixed with acrylic resin to protect them from water used to clean the areas painted in frescoes. After the areas painted in fresco had been cleaned, the a secco part were freed of the resin and either cleaned with specific organic solvents that don't contain water, or with water-based solvents, but a complex specific procedure. The level of the cleaning was determined by the necessity to fully recover all the suitable chromatic effect intended by Michelangelo, and without which the image would appear flat and without modeling. The Last Judgment was very dark due to large amount of animal glue applied in previous restorations and because of the accumulation of soot and dust. There were also many scratches and abraded areas in the lower part of fresco, and consequently the many poorly executed and altered retouching done during the frequent restoration were very noticeable. The very delicate sky areas of the fresco were painted with a blue made from lapislazzuli. In the distant past, these areas had been subjected to a cleaning done with acid applied with a brush. The effects of this procedure are visible in certain areas because the acid had decolorized the lapislazzuli crystals. The complex state of conservation at the Last Judgment required a long period of preliminary study before the cleaning could begin. The cleaning method used was based on the application for about 12 minutes of ammonium carbonate in 4 sheets of Japanese paper, altered with an organic solvent. The very delicate sky areas, painted with a blue made by lapislazzuli, were cleaned in the same way, but gently pressing the sponge against the surface to reabsorb the dirt without whipping. The Council of Trent found the nudity in the Last Judgment scandalous, and in 1565, Daniele da Volterra covered some of the figures with small pieces of clothing. These coverings were painted in tempera on top of the fresco, with the exception of figures of San Biagio and Saint Catherine, which were almost completely repainted in fresco after the original plaster had been removed. The faithful copy of the Last Judgment made by Marcello Venusti and now in Capodimonte Museum in Naples shows us what the two figures looked like originally. In later centuries, other coverings were added in tempera, and there are 4 in all. During the restoration, it was necessary to decide what to do about this covering tempera. There was a lengthy disquisition. At the end, the decision was that to keep the covering of 15th century like a remarkable historical event. In fact, the Council of Trent ordered to cover the nudity, and the others covering of 17th and 18th century was removed as no historical remarkable covering. The areas where the plaster was becoming detached were consolidated. Most of the metal clamps applied in the past were left in place. Losses of plaster have been filled with a mortar made of lime and pozzolana or lime and marble powder. All the retouchings were done in fresco by Carnevale have been kept. It was possible to reduce retouching to a minimum thanks to excellent state of conservation of the frescoes. Where retouching was necessary, it was done using watercolors in the hatched brush strokes to distinguish the retouchings from the original painting, cross-hatching in the ceiling and vertical hatching in the lunettes. No final protection was applied to the surface of the fresco. The future conservation of the frescoes is entrusted to control of the microclimate of chapel that has been scientifically studied over a period of some years. The environment microclimate control system was installed in 1993. The air brought into the building, 10,000 cubic meters, is treated 1.7 every hour. An automatic control panel maintains the temperature between 18 and 50 degrees centigrade, and the relative humidity between 50 and 60%. During the restoration in 1986, it was decided to install in the access scaffolding for the restoration of the vault a graphic workstation for the recording and storage on magnetic media of all data relevant to the condition of the fresco and the artist's technique of execution. The graphic workstation was an Apollo DN 3000. The Nippon Television Network was recording all phases of the cleaning of Last Judgment and of the ceiling on film. Michelangelo painted the entire ceiling and the Last Judgment in one fresco. His technique was highly refined and sustained by his advanced experience in the great Florentine fresco traditions of 15th century. The plaster he shows, however, was a kind that was used in Rome at the time, made of lime and pozzolana, which gives the fresco a greater compactness than the plaster used in Florence, made instead of lime and sand of river. The fresco surface is prepared with an underlayer of rough plaster called the arriccio, made from lime and pozzolana, which is 1.5 centimeters thick in the lunettes. On the ceiling, because of the extreme irregularity of the surface of the vault, the thickness of the arriccio is sometimes even greater. The cartoons of life-size preparatory drawings in most cases were transferred onto plaster by pouncing. In other cases, by indirect incisions of the lines in the cartoon into the wet plaster. All the drawings done in the cartoons of the figures of the prophets and Sibyl, as well as those of the nudi, and a large part of the scenes in the first half of the ceiling were transferred by pouncing. Most of figures of the Last Judgment were transferred by pouncing. The remaining parts were transferred by indirect incision. There are also direct incisions made by the point metal object directly onto the fresh plaster without using a cartoon. This method was used to draw the architectural outlines and for reinforcing the dots of the pouncing. For other parts of a fresco, such as the lunettes and some isolated figures, such as the skin of Saint Bartholomew in the Last Judgment, Michelangelo used no cartoon. In many instances before painting, Michelangelo sketched the figure or part of it in black, white, a brush, as in the lunettes, or else he draws the outlines of the figure with the tip of a brush. The portion of a plaster a painter can paint in this lapse of time, which varies according to the season, the thickness of the plaster, the nature of the wall and the ritual, and the ability of the painter himself, is called giornata or day's work. Michelangelo paints in large giornate, but giornate in the lunettes are of absolutely extraordinary size, about 5 square feet and half each. He uses an a secco technique. That is, he paints on dry wall, adding a binder to the pigment, only in the few cases in which he wants to do the highlights in gold or to correct the lines of a figure. He avoids a secco refinements and the use of those colors that must be applied as secco because they are incompatible with the strong basic nature of the lime in the plaster. But in the same case, in the Last Judgment, for example, he used colors like lacca rossa or giallorino and a large quantity of lapislazuli. Generally, the colors used by Michelangelo are those strictly suitable for fresco paint, such as ochre and oxides in many of their variety. The blacks are obtained from ashes of bones in vines. The blues are smalt or smaltino in the ceiling and the lapislazuli in the Last Judgment. For whites, Michelangelo almost always used San Giovanni white. The pigments are all of the highest quality, but the special character of Michelangelo's colors is not so much in their quality as in the way they are used. He always uses pure colors and avoids mixing them, preferring to obtain the various tonalities throughout successive application of thin washes of color. This required a great confidence in execution and thus not allow for second thoughts. The result is a very clean painting done with clear, brilliant, and luminous colors. Michelangelo's brush strokes, brushwork also contributes to the final effect of the painting. Depending on the desired result, the brush strokes can be ample, fluid, and smooth, or short, thin, and tightly knit of build the modeling. In either cases, they are always measured on and controlled. Michelangelo's color sense in the ceiling is fundamentally that the painter of the 15th century, especially in the first half of the ceiling, in the second half of the ceiling, his color sense seems to become more refined, to free itself from traditional schemes, and to arrive to choice of juxtaposed colors that is more measured, more contained, as can be seen in the later scenes. Here, the dominant color is Morellone red in its purple and the pinks variations that recall the robes of figures in medieval Roman painting. Michelangelo adopts the ancient technique of cangiante, which consists of juxtaposing pure colors that are completely complementary and used in a very personal way to give volume to his figures. Now that we discovered Michelangelo as a great colorist, it may seem strange to make still reference to his sculpture nature when talking about his paintings. It is nevertheless necessary because actually living beside the hammer and the chisel, when painting, Michelangelo keeps following the same conceptual procedure as a sculptor. This can be confirmed comparing some fresco images with the same famous marble piece Moses had and the creators had in the creation of Adam. The Madonna's head in St. Peter Pietà and Eritrean Sibyl's head, in which the painted smooth surface recalled the marble polished one. On the contrary, the tight texture of cross brush strokes in Adam's head recalled the marble surface finished by a toothed chisel. Also, the famous unfinished can be found in some figures in the lunettes or in Last Judgment, such as the clouds supporting certain characters which remind us of the famous prigioni in marble bases. The composition vault and the judgment to conveys Michelangelo's space sensitivity. At the beginning, he conceives the Sistine Chapel ceiling as decorated vault like the ones in the Roman Domus Aurea. Afterwards, he changes his mind and imagines it as the upwards prolongation of the chapel's architectonic structure, with a great ceilingless hall where Prophet and Sibyl sit, while in the sky appear two theophanies. That is the scenes of the creation separated by small golden arcs. A narrow strip of sky in the two heads of the vault conveys exactly Michelangelo's conceptions of the vault. As we know, Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment about 26 years after he had painted the ceiling, and the same concept inverted is adopted for this fresco. He imagines that the black wall of the chapel has disappeared, and in the great resulting space appears the Last Judgment, terrible scene. Here too, Michelangelo suggests the correct interpretation by painting an image of Last Judgment as supported by the actual marble cornice of the chapel, as if he were a spectator. I would like to conclude this quick summary of the restoration and of Fresco's Michelangelo's work with a note about Madonna's face in the Last Judgment. She was painted by a point of a brush with separate colors, pink, red, white, like an antelitteram divisionism or pointillism technique. Thank you very much. Thank you.